now listening to Cassphere Podcast.
Hey everybody, I'm Host Name and welcome back for another deep dive.
Back again.
Yeah, you guys send in a ton of stuff about AI therapists, and I gotta say, I'm a little nervous to dive into this one.
It's a big one for sure. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, so where do we even begin with this? Like, I know we've got research articles, personal stories, even some legal stuff.
Definitely a lot of different angles. So maybe we start with a specific case that really brings those different aspects together.
You're talking about Sewell Setzer III, right?
Yeah, his story is just tragic. And it raises so many questions about the potential and the risks of AI in mental health.
For those who haven't heard, Sewell was a 14-year-old boy from Orlando who died by suicide after interacting with a chatbot on Character AI.
And what makes this case even more heartbreaking is that according to the lawsuit filed by Sewell's mother, he had become very dependent on these chatbots, especially ones based on characters from Game of Thrones.
So he's looking for connection. He's looking for an escape.
Right, and the lawsuit alleges that he was expressing suicidal thoughts to these chatbots. But the platform didn't flag them, didn't offer any kind of intervention.
Wow, that's heavy. I mean, we're talking about a young boy reaching out for help and essentially being ignored by the very thing he's turning to.
It really underscores the need for safeguards for responsible development.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a technology that can have a profound impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that we're dealing with a spectrum of AI here, right? Like some AI is more basic, like those chatbots you see on websites that pop up and say, "Hi, how can I help you?"
Right, those are often what we call rules-based AI. Think of it like a decision tree or a flow chart. The chatbot's responses are pre-programmed based on specific keywords or phrases.
So it's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book for conversation.
Exactly. And that can be good for things like customer service, where you want the interaction to be predictable and efficient.
Makes sense. But when it comes to mental health, that approach seems like it could be pretty limiting.
You're right. Nuanced conversations require a different kind of AI. That's where generative AI comes in.
Okay, so how's that different?
Think of it like a jazz musician. They know all the scales and chords, but they can also improvise based on what they're hearing in the moment.
So they're creating something new in real time.
Exactly. And that's what generative AI does. It can generate unique responses based on the vast amount of data it's been trained on.
So it's like having a conversation with someone who's read every book ever written and can pull out the perfect quote or anecdote for any situation.
That's a good way to put it. And that's why generative AI is so powerful for things like chatbots and virtual assistants.
It sounds amazing, but it also sounds kind of scary. Like, what if the AI starts saying things that are harmful or inaccurate?
That's the big challenge with generative AI. It can sometimes hallucinate or make things up because it's pulling information from so many different sources without really understanding the context.
So it's like it's got all this knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily have wisdom.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to have human oversight, especially when AI is being used in sensitive areas like mental health.
We saw what can happen when that oversight is lacking with Sewell's case. It's a stark reminder that we can't just let AI run wild. We need to be thoughtful and responsible about its development and deployment.
Absolutely. And there are companies out there trying to do just that. One example is Wobot.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. What is it exactly?
It's an AI-powered chatbot that delivers cognitive behavioral therapy CBT through text-based conversations.
So it's like having a digital therapist in your pocket.
In a way, yes. But it's important to note that Wobot is designed to be used alongside traditional therapy, not instead of it.
Got it. So it's more like a supplement to human care.
Right. It's like having a digital coach that helps you practice the CDT skills you're learning with your therapist.
Okay, that makes sense. And how does Wobot actually work? Like, what's going on behind the scenes?
They use a combination of pre-written scripts and natural language processing to understand what the user is saying and guide them through exercises.
So it's not just spitting out generic advice, it's actually tailoring the conversation based on the user's input.
Exactly. And they have a team of psychologists and clinicians who review those conversations and make sure the AI is staying on track.
So there's still that human element involved.
Yeah.
That's reassuring.
And they're very transparent about Wobot's limitations. They acknowledge that it's not equipped to deal with severe mental health conditions and always encourage users to seek professional help if needed.
Okay, so they're being cautious and responsible. That's good to hear.
Yeah, but what about the bigger picture? Like, how is AI impacting the way we think about and approach mental health care as a whole?
Well, one of the biggest potential benefits is increased access to care.
Because right now, it's really hard for a lot of people to find a therapist who takes their insurance. And even if they do, the wait list can be months long.
Exactly. So AI could potentially help bridge that gap by offering more affordable and readily available support options.
So it's like AI could help democratize mental health care, make it accessible to more people who need it. That's the hope. And there are already platforms being used for things like diagnosing mental health conditions. For example, there's a platform called Live that's being used in Israel to help diagnose and treat trauma in war victims.
Wow, that sounds incredible. Using AI to diagnose trauma? That's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's still early days, but the idea is that AI can help identify patterns and symptoms that might be missed by human clinicians, leading to earlier diagnosis and intervention.
Okay, I can see how that could be really helpful. But what about the human element? Can a machine really understand the complexities of human emotions and trauma?
That's a valid question, and it's something that researchers and ethicists are grappling with. But there are also platforms using AI to analyze things like vocal patterns and facial expressions to detect emotional states. Imagine a world where your therapist could actually see your emotions in real time.
Okay, that's fascinating, but also a little creepy.
Mm.
Where do we draw the line? It feels like we're heading into some uncharted territory here.
Yeah, we definitely are. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. It's not about blindly embracing the technology. It's about understanding its potential, its limitations, and the ethical considerations.
Right. Because it's one thing to use AI to help schedule appointments or manage case notes, but it's a whole other ballgame when you're talking about using it to diagnose and treat mental health conditions.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to hear from people who have actually used AI therapists to get a sense of what their experiences have been like.
Yeah, you're right. I found this really interesting piece by a writer named Ayana Herndon, who tried out Therapist GPT, an AI therapy platform. She documented her entire experience, and I think it provides some valuable insights.
Perfect. Let's dive into her story. What was her experience like?
Well, first of all, she decided to try Therapist GPT because therapy can be expensive.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, totally. So she was looking for a more affordable option. And what's interesting is that she found it surprisingly easy to use, like no complicated onboarding process or anything. She just started chatting, and the AI seemed to listen and respond in a way that felt supportive.
That ease of access is definitely a plus, especially for people who might be hesitant to seek traditional therapy.
Exactly. And Ayana found that the AI was good at validating her feelings and offering practical advice, like creating routines and practicing self-care. But here's the thing. She noticed that a lot of the advice was pretty generic stuff she'd heard before, either from her human therapist or just through general knowledge.
Makes sense. AI systems are trained on massive data sets, which means they're good at picking up on common patterns and advice. But they may not always be able to provide that nuanced, personalized support that a human therapist can.
And that's what she found too. She felt like the AI was helpful for a quick pick-me-up or a reminder of things she already knew, but it couldn't really go deep into her personal experiences or traumas. And sometimes you need more than just generic advice. You need someone who understands your unique situation and can offer truly tailored guidance.
You're hitting on a crucial point here. Human connection is so vital in therapy. It's about feeling seen, heard, and understood. And while AI is getting better at mimicking human conversation, it's still a long way from replicating that depth of connection.
Exactly. That's where I start to get a little uneasy. I mean, what happens when people start forming emotional attachments to these AI therapists?
That's a really important question. If we're not careful, AI could create a false sense of intimacy that ultimately prevents people from seeking the real human connection they need.
You know what? I think we need to take a closer look at public perception and how people are really feeling about AI therapists. Are they open to it, or are they hesitant? Let's explore that more in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've been talking about this whole idea of like forming these emotional attachments with AI. And it makes me wonder, what's the general vibe out there? Are people actually ready for this? Like, are they open to embracing AI therapists?
Well, there was this Statista survey you sent over, and it shows that most Americans are still a bit hesitant about the idea of AI-led therapy, but there's a growing group who are open to it.
Really? I'm kind of surprised by that. What do you think is driving that shift?
I think there's a few things. AI is becoming more and more a part of our daily lives, so people are becoming more comfortable interacting with it. And like we talked about earlier, the mental health system is really struggling to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, totally. Like long wait lists, high costs, it's a real problem.
Exactly. And so if you're struggling and you just can't get in to see a human therapist, I can see why people might be more willing to try something new.
That makes sense. And I also wonder if the younger generations are maybe more open to it, too. They've grown up with technology in a way that we haven't.
That's a good point. They're digital natives. It's just part of their world.
Right. And thinking back to Ayana's experience with therapist GPT, even though she felt like AI couldn't fully replace a human therapist, she still found it to be a valuable tool.
Absolutely. She said it was a good way to work through her thoughts and feelings between her sessions with her human therapist.
Like a digital journal that gives you feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes you just need to vent or get something off your chest.
Mhm.
And maybe a bot is better than nothing in those moments.
And for some people, that might be all they need. It could be a good first step for those who aren't ready for traditional therapy.
I hadn't thought about it that way. That's interesting. It just occurred to me, we've been talking so much about AI as like a direct replacement for therapists, but what about its potential to actually help human therapists?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of platforms out there doing just that, like helping with scheduling appointments, managing case notes, even suggesting potential treatment plans based on a patient's data.
That's huge. Imagine all the time therapists could save if AI could handle those administrative tasks. It would free them up to focus on actually helping their clients.
And burnout is a real problem in the mental health field. So if AI can help reduce that burden, it could make a big difference.
For sure. There's also that platform you mentioned earlier, Mentalic, I think it was called.
Oh.
The one that analyzes therapy sessions and gives feedback to the therapist.
Yes, exactly. It helps them identify patterns, see things they might have missed, and just overall improve their skills, like having a coach for therapists.
I like that. It's not about replacing the human expertise. It's about using AI to support and enhance it.
Exactly. So we've seen how AI can be used as a direct therapy tool, as a way to support traditional therapy. And as a resource for human therapists, it's clear that AI is really changing the mental health landscape.
It really is. It's both exciting and a bit overwhelming all at the same time. So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for AI in mental health?
Well, I think AI is going to become even more personalized and sophisticated.
In what way?
Like, imagine AI therapists that can create truly customized treatment plans based on your individual history, your personality, your goals. It's like having a therapist that knows you inside and out.
That sounds amazing, but also low Black Mary. How well will these systems actually know us? What happens if they get it wrong?
Those are important questions.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to the need for strong ethical guidelines and data privacy protections.
Right. We can't just throw caution to the wind.
Exactly. But on the other hand, think about the possibilities. What if we could use AI to detect early warning signs of mental health conditions before people even realize they're struggling?
That could be game-changing. Early intervention is so crucial.
Right. And what if AI could help us understand the root causes of mental illness in ways that we haven't been able to before?
We could develop better treatments. Target the underlying issues, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. It's about thinking big picture. This is a new frontier. There are risks for sure, but the potential benefits are huge.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around for sure. We've covered the benefits, the concerns, real-life experiences of people using AI for therapy.
We talked about different types of AI, the ethical considerations. It's been a journey.
It really has. And I think it's just the beginning. This conversation is going to keep evolving as AI continues to develop.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I think the key takeaway is that AI is a tool. It can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to shape its development and make sure it's used responsibly.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so I think it's time to get real about some of the challenges ahead. We've talked about all this potential, but what are the big things we need to be watching out for as AI gets more and more woven into this world of mental health care?
Well, you already hit on one of the biggest ones, ethical guidelines. Like, that's got to be at the forefront of all of this. We have to be thinking about data privacy, potential bias, and just the possibility for harm, especially for people who are already vulnerable.
Right, yeah. Let's break those down a bit because those are some serious issues. So first, data privacy. Therapy is all about sharing really personal stuff, sometimes embarrassing things. How can we be sure that all that data is actually protected when AI is in the mix?
You're right to be concerned about that. We
Wow.
need super strong regulations and safeguards in place to make sure that companies are handling that data responsibly.
So what would that look like?
Well, for starters, getting informed consent from users before anything is collected or shared.
There's no sneaky fine print.
Yeah, exactly. And then using strong encryption to actually protect that information.
Okay, so that's the technical side. What about the human side?
Right. There has to be transparency, too.
Right.
Users should know how their data is being used, who has access to it,
Mm-hmm.
all of that.
And what about bias? We've talked about how AI can inherit biases from the data it's trained on. So could that lead to some seriously messed up situations? Like, could AI therapists end up treating people differently based on their race or gender or even their income level?
That's a huge concern, and it's something that developers need to be actively working to prevent.
So how do they do that?
Well, first they need diverse data sets to train the AI on. If the data is skewed, the AI is going to be skewed too.
Right. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Exactly. And then the algorithms themselves need to be designed to mitigate bias.
That makes sense. And I'm also thinking about that case with the eating disorder chatbot Tessa, who's giving out some seriously harmful advice, even though it was supposed to be helpful. So how do we prevent something like that from happening with other AI therapists?
Testing. Before any AI is released to the public, it needs to be rigorously tested in real-world scenarios.
With real people?
Yes, exactly. With diverse groups of people so that we can catch those potential problems before they cause actual harm.
Okay, that makes sense. But AI is constantly evolving, so it can't just be a one-and-done thing, right?
You're right. It needs to be an ongoing process. Monitoring the AI, getting feedback from both users and therapists, and being ready to make changes as the technology develops.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about using it ethically and responsibly. And that responsibility doesn't just fall on one person or one group.
Definitely not. It's a shared responsibility. The developers need to be ethical. The policymakers who set the rules need to be thoughtful. And even therapists who choose to use AI in their practices have a responsibility to do so carefully.
So it's like this whole ecosystem where everyone needs to be working together, asking the tough questions and making sure we're not just rushing ahead without thinking about the consequences.
Exactly. And that's what makes these conversations so important. We need to keep having them now while the technology is still relatively new so we can shape the future of AI in a way that benefits everyone.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started with the heartbreaking story of Sewell Setzer III, which really highlighted the potential dangers of AI in mental health. And then we explored the other side of the coin, the ways that AI could increase access to care support therapists and even help us understand mental health in completely new ways.
It's been a wild ride.
It really has. And I think I'm walking away from this with a mix of hope and caution. There's so much potential here, but we have to be careful. We have to be thoughtful.
I agree. And for our listeners, I think the biggest takeaway is this. AI is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we want to use it and what kind of future we want to create with it.
It's a great way to put it. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing. And remember, as AI gets more and more sophisticated, it's more important than ever to ask ourselves, what does it truly mean to be human? And how can we use technology to enhance our well-being without losing sight of our humanity? That's something we're thinking about.